Hey everyone, today we're talking with Dr. G on migration from SAS to Python. And Dr. G is a well-respected and well-known in this space, and we're excited to talk to him. Hey, Dr. G, how are you?
Hey, Greg. This filming thing is crazy. So thank you for inviting me. I'm Mike Gonzales. I'm the Chief Data Scientist for Prolifics and a professor at the University of Texas, where I teach advanced application programming and quantitative analytics. So, Craig, you were talking about SAS to Pi.
Right. Yeah, so today's IT, excuse me, in today's IT, there's a lot of people are confused on processes and trying to make those better and efficient overall, and trying to to decrease the cost and increase scalability. The other thing is expanding the ability to monitor the digital enterprise. So how can we move forward with this type of migration from going from SAS to Pi?
Well, one of the things that we want to make sure that we understand is that to a large extent, SAS represents a legacy environment, right? So this has been, grown and evolved over the course of decades. But as an on-prem solution, it certainly isn't taking advantage of everything that is on the cloud. So the modern cloud architecture really represents a real windfall, a boon for a lot of organizations. But there's an important part of planning on how to go from a SaaS legacy environment like 9.4 on-prem to a cloud architecture without it especially requires planning if you don't want to extend the footprint of SaaS, right? If you're trying to control the costs. And one of the big things that happens with SaaS these days is simply the complexity of the licensing, the expense of the licensing as a whole. And they're using old architecture like grid architecture as opposed to containers, for instance, and the MPP on a cloud architecture. I don't know if that answered your question.
Yeah, it sure does. It sure does. As you said, it's difficult to do a lot of that. It's older architecture, so moving forward into something a little more scalable, quicker, faster, cloud-based, open source, that kind of thing. I think that's a key.
You brought up a good point on the open source, right? So it's not just taking a legacy environment like SAS. It's actually converting it to something that's really starting to dominate the space. That's more, the right term the term that I would use is more native to a cloud architecture like Python or PySpark, right? Because all of these big cloud architectures, Azure as an example, they really have embraced open source, and where we can actually leverage that open source as well as the cloud architecture as a whole, I think it brings huge value to an organization. But it's not a trivial thing to go from SAS to Python as an example, right? It's just not a trivial thing.
I can imagine. Now, that being said, do you have a demo to show us, something like that?
We do, and we'll get to that. What I'd like to do is put up a framework, though. One of the things that Prolifics has done is we've spent a lot of our effort not only doing this for clients, migrating a lot of different things. We migrate databases to modern architectures. We migrate applications. And from a data science perspective, we also migrate legacy systems. It doesn't matter if it's Tableau or Click. In our conversation today, we're talking about SAS specifically. But our framework, the way that our framework works, and this is, by the way, is Prolific's Agile Migration Framework. So we refer to it as PAM. One of the key things that we're representing in our framework is 3 different migration paths. Now, there's more than that, right? Gartner, I believe, suggested something like 8 different migration paths that a company could take, right? But that minutia is a little bit more difficult to get your head around.
Right.
But we do believe that you should consider replatforming or rehosting, refactoring, which is what we're really going to demonstrate today, and I'll explain a little bit about that in a second, and then replacement, right? Where replacement is always an option, right? I can take whatever my legacy environment is, and I can completely redesign and rewrite everything completely optimized for the target platform. But that's also the most expensive. It's the riskiest because it's a huge regular development effort, right? So it suffers all of the fleas that you would normally suffer, right? Gold plating and from the client, just focusing on real solid requirements, functional and non-functional. It's just the riskiest piece. Most expensive, time-consuming, and riskiest. So what we really want to emphasize is this whole issue about refactoring, and that's the center of our PAM methodology, where we can actually take this legacy code like SAS and convert automatically maybe 80% of that code, wow. 85% of that code to Python or PySpark, either one. And they're sufficiently different, right? But we could actually convert 80 to 85% of that code automatically, which really reduces the amount of time it takes, right? So instead of spending, say, for instance, yeah, well, it might take a developer maybe 3 weeks to convert maybe 1,000 lines of code, maybe a little bit longer, maybe a month.
Maybe me longer.
Yeah, well, and we're talking about people who really know, they have to know SAS and they have to know Python, right? So it's not a trivial matter.
Right.
But we can do it with our refactoring tool, our accelerator. We can reduce that time to maybe a developer getting it all done in maybe 3 or 4 days, literally reducing it by a factor of 10, right? The amount of effort and time and energy and money that's spent on it.
So you hone in on that migration, and it cuts down on 80 to 85%. That's pretty amazing.
It is significant, right?
Yeah, it's super significant. So as a business, who would want to use this solution? Like, so let's say I'm a company. Why would I want to use this solution?
Well, so that's a great question. I want to bring up a statement that our research has found out in the space. So this is purely from a data science perspective, right? But using Gartner's Magic Quadrant, you can see this on your screen. This is a 2019 Magic Quadrant. It's similar to the 2020 though. And SAS, as you can see, is a leader in this space, right? In the data science platform space, according to Gartner, they're a leader. And it is what it is. It makes sense. SAS is a popular application that's been out there for decades.
Right.
On the other hand, in that same report in 2019, Gartner issued a SWOT report, which is just an analysis of that vendor. And in that SWOT report, they flat out stated that of all of the vendors that are on this Magic Quadrant, SAS is the one that they receive more requests on how to get off of the platform. How do I replace SAS?
Wow.
So when you talk about, well, who would be interested in it? It's going to be a lot of organizations that have a lot invested in a SaaS environment that are tired of the complexity of the licensing, and tired of just the typical seems to be ever increasing costs to maintain that environment, right? And we've seen this in the evolution of any legacy system, where over the course of the time they seem to be more complex in terms of their product offerings, more complex in terms of how do you even license the doggone stuff, and then gradually getting more and more expensive to maintain. So the companies that would be interested are those that want to reduce that footprint. You may not eliminate the footprint entirely, or at least not immediately, but you can certainly reduce the footprint of those legacy systems and start really taking advantage of open source, native to a modern cloud architecture, which is absolutely the trend of any large organization these days.
So those are some of the other benefits. Obviously, reducing the footprint is one of them, but some of the other benefits you talked about are 85% code migration, that kind of thing. What are some other benefits to it?
Well, so the whole scalability issue, one of the things that a modern cloud architecture like Azure does for us, right? They give us the ability to scale quickly. So one of the big challenges with any on-prem like SAS, if I have a big SAS implementation, if I run out of disk space, I got to throw more platters at it. If I run out of processing power, I got to throw more CPUs at it. And basically, you're buying a big chunk of space. Right. Whether you're using it efficiently or not is irrelevant, right? You're buying a big chunk of real estate. And that's what makes these legacy systems very expensive.
Wow.
The benefit on a cloud environment, if I'm a data scientist and I have a special one-off project, I had a special project that I had to do for a client that I threw 64 CPUs at it, right? Finished the project, and 3 seconds after I got the results back, I just turned it back off, right? So I only paid for those 64 CPUs when I needed it.
How beautiful is that?
What's that?
How beautiful is that? That's nice, yeah.
That's fantastic. I mean, just the flexibility alone. And then the whole collaboration, right? So I can collaborate with anybody in my sphere, right? Whether it's the ETL folks, or maybe it's a Gen 2 data lake, or Synapse, or S3, or Snowflake. I mean, there's any number of different platforms out there that reflect this modern architecture that I can easily collaborate with. And that kind of synergy, I think, really lends itself, especially to data science and BI type of initiatives.
Wow, amazing. Now you've got me all excited. I would love to see this demo. Okay.
Can you see it?
Yes, I can see it.
So this is Prolific Studio. We've spent a lot of time evolving this with a partner, and we're going to continue to grow this out. So it's not just, I know that we're talking about SAS to Python and PySpark today, but we're actually expanding this out to include stuff like Microsoft SQL to EDB as an example.
Wow.
So let me just open up a workspace here. We're going to do just a simple test. So I'm going to open up a proc. These are all just different proc steps that anybody who's writing SAS code definitely appreciates all of these procs. And I'm going to do a simple one. This is just a frequency proc. It's a popular one, obviously, for descriptive statistics and all that kind of stuff. But this comes, we have our own data out there and everything else, so we make sure that it all is complete code and it executes. So if you see on the bottom here, I'm going to just take this chunk of code and I'm going to convert it to PySpark. We also have pandas. So with PySpark translation, we're actually using PySpark data frames. If we convert to pandas, then it's going to be Python using panda data frames.
Right.
So I'm just going to convert it to PySpark. And, this is a small chunk of code, so it's quick to get processed. And so I'll show you now. Let me go back up. We've got that code out. So let me expand the Python. And I have a couple of outputs here. One is the PySpark PY, which is just a basically Python file, but we also can create and push this all out to a Jupyter notebook. So I'm gonna pull up the Python piece. Now, one of the things that we try to do in refactoring, especially, Craig, is we really want to make sure that the code is supportable, right? Maintainable,
right?
Readable. Right, so we put in a lot of different comments. We break down SAS by blocks. So a natural set of blocks would be whatever your data is, and any number of different proc statements that you might have. Data steps or proc statements, doesn't matter. We'll break them all down in blocks so that the programmer can follow which code has been successfully translated, and then those blocks that we may not be able to completely translate the code, where the Python person would have to kind of fill in the blanks, right?
Right.
So let me just execute this real quick.
Wow.
And again, this is, I know it's verbose code, right? So you take a couple of lines of SAS code, but in order to make it maintainable and understandable for everybody, we're erring on the side of verbose versus optimization. Refactoring has really never been, the definition of refactoring has never been optimized for that cloud architecture, right?
Right.
The purpose is to get there as quickly as possible. And there's a lot of benefits to us doing this for clients. One of the big things that we offer for a client is the ability to get onto their target cloud architecture. Maybe it's PySpark being executed on Databricks, on Azure and accessing a Gen 2 data lake, as an example.
Right.
We want to get them there as quickly as possible so that they could start experiencing that new platform, right? What does it mean to their process? You know, what kind of upskill do they need to take? What kind of changes, if any, to their procedures do they need to take now that they're up on a cloud architecture? So this can be something that's more permanent. It's not optimized, obviously, but it could be permanent, or it can be an interim solution, right? Get them onto the cloud architecture as quickly as possible. Right. And when their budget and their time permits, then they could go for a full replacement if they chose to.
Right. And you can also extend it, correct?
Absolutely. You know, once it's regular Python, right? So, you know, this is code that anybody's going to recognize, right? So any Python geek can start hacking away at it, right?
Nice. Very nice. Very nice.
So we really try to couple everything with efficiency, get it translated as quickly as possible. But the translation has to be sufficiently verbose so that anybody with Python experience can look at it and know what the heck it's doing.
Right. Supportability and code coverage, that kind of thing. But yeah, it's nice to see.
Perfect.
Yeah.
So go ahead.
Let me ask you this question. So how can someone implement this in their own IT environment? You know, what are the steps involved?
So let me jump off. I'm going to stop sharing for a second here to get back on a conversation with you. So what we've done in our clients is we have a couple of steps as suggested by the framework, right? So we like to think of the Prolifics Agile migration as a business-friendly migration.
Right.
I think too often executives think that they can force people off, you know, thou was just going to get off. And I suppose if you can do that, that's fine. But oftentimes a lot of executives are going to give you a big pushback saying, you know, I'm not going to give up this. I need to better understand it. I don't have budget, that kind of stuff.
I've seen it.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, we've actually all seen it. So what we want to do is we really want to help with education, right? For user communities to better understand what the value is to get onto a cloud architecture versus what they're spending now on on-prem or legacy environments. Right. And then we will do a deep dive in there to determine their readiness. There are some applications and business communities that might be anxious to get off of on-prem, right? They might really welcome the opportunity to get onto a modern cloud architecture and an open source, a modern language, right, for data science. And then there might be others that even if they're interested, their legacy system is what we would describe as brittle. In other words, if you pick it up, it's going to start breaking. Mm-hmm. And those ones are usually the most mature. So they've been tuned so much to that on-prem architecture, right? Fine-tuned to that on-prem architecture that the minute you touch them, they start just kind of breaking apart. So it's problematic, right? So some of those brittle applications you might want to save for the last.
You're saying they're so tightly coupled at that point.
Exactly. You know, so they've been out there for 10 years and they're so highly tuned to that particular on-prem environment that, you know, it's going to be problematic when you lift them up.
Sure.
So our whole readiness assessment really tries to understand the business agenda. In other words, budget, objectives, you know, time constraints, any of those issues, the availability of data. Because when we do our migrations, we're not in a vacuum, right? So there's always a data migration layer and there's a governance layer that can a security layer that can heavily influence what data might be available in the cloud. So we want to understand their agenda, we want to understand their data, and then we want to understand the code complexity. So once we do those steps, then we can better isolate which is the best migration path for them. Is it a replatform option, right? Is it a refactor?
It's not a one size fits all. It's very custom to the business.
Exactly. And so that's why we call it a business-friendly environment, or business-friendly migration, right? We're really trying to accommodate the user community, the business itself, as opposed to trying to force fit everybody into one, we're going to redesign and redevelop everything kind of scenario.
Now, let me ask you this. So, one of the keys to being or providing value to your customers is being able to measure that success. So how would you go about measuring success of a migration?
That's a great point. So during our readiness assessment, what we really want to do is understand what is success. And that's going to change. That's not necessary. It's not just, two metrics. You run in 3 seconds, you're able to consume this data. We're able to point our application to this data science process that has to occur, stick it in some kind of DevOps or ML ops kind of stream. So success really depends a lot on the business community itself and what their business agenda is. In some cases, success could be, the predictive accuracy has to be, 98% plus or minus 1.5%, 2%, whatever it might happen to be. So it could be success is accuracy. It could be success is implementing it in a process flow, right? More like an ML ops, a DevOps, right? Can you put it in a pipeline for us? So that might be a bigger criteria for success. Or success is, can we access a data lake that's out there so our data scientists can continue on doing the work that they need to get done. So we try to work with business to identify those success criteria.
Excellent. So let's say I'm interested in this solution. Who can I contact from Prolifics to get this started?
So we have there's an email address that's going to be at the tail end of this video, but solutions@prolifics.com. You can always email that group and they'll quickly respond.
Okay, very, very nice. Well, listen, Dr. G, I really appreciate the time. I know you're a leader in the space, and it's always a pleasure to talk with you. Excellent demo. I'm pretty excited about it. This looks like a game changer, in my opinion. So
thank you very much, Greg. Appreciate you inviting me.
Yeah, not at all. Have a good day.
Thank you.